Hello and welcome to the Divine Renovation Podcast, where we seek to inspire you to move your parish from maintenance to mission. I'm Mike Tanner, and I'm your host, and I'm joined with some familiar faces. It's been a while since we've been here together, but I'm joined here today with Ron Huntley. Nice to see you today, Ron.
Good to be back, Mike.
And also Rob McDowell.
Hello, Mike.
Nice to see you again. And we have a familiar face to us, but maybe not a familiar face to everybody. We're joined today by Tanya Noye.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
We were just excited to have you here. I know that you know you're a friend of the ministry and a friend of what we do, but we wanted to have some conversations today about what you do outside. So maybe we can start with having you introduce yourself. What do you do? Where do you do it? And start from there.
Sure thing. So I actually, like you say, I work at Saint Benedict Parish. I'm responsible for Alpha and engagement, which means our Alpha programs. Engagement means a lot of other things, hospitality and basically trying to connect everybody into the parish in some way, shape, or form. So post-Alpha for sure. Things like getting into ministry service. So a whole bunch of things.
So basically
under that umbrella.
everything.
Basically everything. No, not everything, but a lot of things. And it's awesome. I have the best job in the world. So yeah.
Great. So now I want to talk a little bit about your experience coming into the church and coming into ministry. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you came into the church and a little bit about that story for us.
Yeah, sure. So I was a cradle Catholic. And as a teen, my confirmation was my graduation. Didn't have to go anymore, and I was super excited about that. But thanks be to God, I had a conversion of heart to the Lord when I was around 21. And so that really began my faith journey. My husband, on the other hand, was not Catholic, probably was not even Christian. Don't even know if he really believed in God, to be honest. So that was always a little bit of a struggle within our relationship. Mm-hmm. But when we came to Saint Benedict, he joined us there. And you're not there for much longer than about, 8 seconds before you start hearing about Alpha. So about 7 years ago, we started hearing about Alpha from Father James. And I was super excited about it. I was like, oh, Mike, we should do this. And he was like, absolutely not. It is never going to happen. So I began to pray and pray and pray. And thankfully, somebody within our parish actually met him and went out for a cup of coffee and invited him to join him at Alpha. And so he came home super excited and he said, yeah, I think I'm going to try that Alpha thing. And I said, that's great because I've already registered us.
That's right, I remember that.
Typical. So we did Alpha and thanks be to God, he really encountered the Lord at Alpha. And it changed everything. That Easter vigil, he came into the Catholic Church in full communion. Wow. And he went on to serve on Alpha team as host and MC. And actually last fall, he coached a church locally and helping get them started in Alpha. And really it changed his life and in turn changed mine and my whole family's life. So, yeah.
One of the things that's so cool about that story, because you kind of alluded to that person who invited Mike out for coffee and talked to him. That was Bill.
Right.
And he's been on the podcast before. Amazing. And Bill had just come to Christ.
Right.
And so you got people who've just come to Christ coming alongside of other people who are not sure where they're at, scared, nervous, have questions, so compelled by their experience and encounter with Christ and such a safe place that he would go. Because I remember being with Bill while he was going through that experience with Mike. I was the first person he'd ever mentored and really took the risk to go alongside to see if he could bring them to Christ. And it was just so significant. And now here's Mike coaching other churches doing it. Like, come on. Just no, that doesn't happen in churches.
It's like you can't even make this up.
It's crazy. So cool.
So did you, when you came back into the church, and had your, conversion, post-graduation conversion,
reconversion,
reconversion,
deeper conversion.
Right.
why did you decide? I mean, now you're in the church. You are working at a church. You're doing these things. How did that come about for you? How did you decide that ministry was something that you wanted to be involved with?
So I feel like it's not something I really decided to do. It's something that I was called into. I started my job at Saint Benedict Parish last June, and when it was first sort of presented to me as, you know, an option of maybe you should apply for this, I thought, well, there's no way. You know, I'm a nurse, so it just didn't make sense to me. But you know, in my prayer and surrender to God, I really was able to discern that I was being called into that. So after 23 years of nursing, I resigned and went on full time in June. So I think it was never something that I had imagined or planned for. So, but it was definitely of God. Yeah.
What's so cool about that too, because you know we're good friends,
Yes.
and watching your family just engage, and especially you really were a leader in your family in terms of your faithfulness, and then and the connections. And your husband Mike is just so much fun. Like, he's just crazy funny. I love the guy. But watching you guys integrate, we all saw in you. I remember your friendship with Jen and grow and all these things. You know, you were afraid of, you know, public speaking wasn't something you were comfortable with. And so there was all kinds of things that probably you wouldn't have seen precluding you from, but we all saw the call in your life. Like, we saw your character, we saw your love for Christ, we saw all kinds of things in you. You have people investing in you very intentionally, whether you knew it or not, bringing you to life. Like, and we watched it.
Absolutely.
And so there's a backstory to that with all kinds of other people who knew you, loved you, were intentionally breathing into you. And that's the culture at Saint Benedict Parish.
Absolutely.
And so as people come into their calling, as they become aware of, as they start to evolve and grow, I remember seeing you at work,
Yes.
you know, talking about your work and how your involvement at Saint Benedict was impacting positively the way you were engaging with, like, it's just so cool.
Absolutely. And Ron, you know, we've had that conversation before, and, you know, just giving you thanks for, and so many other people, like you say, at St. Benedict, to be able to say, I see in you these qualities, and to try to help to encourage and build on that was really, it was really powerful. I think, you know, I had a bit of natural ability that you saw in me, but really gently encouraging me to step out of my comfort zone in different ways was really helpful. And it was really helpful in my work environment. I worked in a very busy, very stressful clinic. And so there was a lot of things that I could take from what was happening in my church life and translate that into in everyday work. So yeah,
Cool.
it was
Isn't that
amazing.
cool?
I know.
Isn't that exactly what we want the church to do? Because the church is there to build up people and make them great. And you experience that, and then to be able to bring you back into the church in terms of a full-time role. And you're that mentor, you're that person who's looking at people and building them up and growing them and investing them.
Yeah,
exactly
that's the goal,
what
to
we're
be an
trying to do.
empowering leader, to empower other people to lead. Yeah.
Well, and we always have these separations as well between, like, okay, well, I'll go to church and I'll do my church life, and then I'll go to work and I'll do my work life. And you know, you and I were talking earlier today about athletics and how we see these parallels between athletics and church in terms of teams, et cetera. And I think the ability to take what you're experiencing in these things and say, oh, this is applicable in my life.
Right.
And to start to break down these walls between our life in the church and our life when we're driving home or when we're at work and those types of things. So I'd like to, so with that in mind, how do you think Alpha and the Alpha experience has impacted specifically your husband, but also people that you've dealt with? How do you think it's changed the way that they blur those lines between this is my life at church and this is my life somewhere else? How do you think that impacts them?
Yeah, I think if nothing else, what you take away from Alpha is authentic relationships. And whether or not somebody has an encounter of the Lord and has a massive conversion. I mean, we've seen that time and time again, but we've also seen people that haven't had that.
Majority.
Right? The majority.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, the Lord's still working in them. But I would say their biggest takeaway is to see a healthy group dynamic in which people are able to respect one another during small group conversations. Even outside of Alpha, our table hosts stay in communication with their table group and touch base with them. You know, if somebody's going through a difficult time, they're reaching out to them saying, hey, you know, how did that procedure go that you were so nervous about? Or how did that exam go that you were worrying about? Or just thinking about you. And those relationships, we don't often see those, especially in work environments that are unhealthy, and sometimes even within our own families. So quite often people come to Alpha, and for some people, it's the first time they see healthy relationships.
Wow.
And be listened to.
To be listened to,
be able
and
to have an
cared for.
opinion and not told what to do or what to think.
Absolutely.
That's so fun. You know, one of the things I've noticed is we skipped, like, because Alpha wasn't my conversion.
Right.
And if you
Mine
came
either.
to faith in 21, a reconvert, like, what was that transition for you? Like, kind of glossed over it. And I'm thinking, hey, I want to hear that story.
Yeah. Oh, my own conversion. Wow. How many minutes do we have? So I was in a really, really dark place in my teens. Hard times in family situations and just other personal situations, dealing with a lot of stuff. It was honestly, I was so angry and so bitter, and I thought, if this is something that God is going to allow for people, all this suffering, then why would I ever follow a God that would allow for this? And so I can't even say I wasn't a believer. I was a believer. I was just really upset and really angry and didn't want anything to do with the Lord. And but it wasn't until I saw a real conversion of my parents. My mom and my dad had, through their own struggles, had this amazing conversion of heart. And it was witnessing them coming to faith and them becoming this unbelievable couple and solidifying their marriage in Christ. And I thought, okay, well, that's weird, but obviously there's something to this. And so I was so tired of being angry all the time that I decided to try to let that go and just give some space to God. And so sort of began a journey over a few years, I would say. But it wasn't until I went on a pilgrimage. And it was the first time I had experienced somebody praying over me.
Is that at Medjugorje? Is that what
It was in Medjugorje.
Yeah.
And I was 21 years old. And I was watching as people were being prayed over by priests, hundreds of people. And some of the people were falling down, and I was like, okay, that's really weird. But and and I had this whole image in my head of, like back in the day, the televangelists and whacking people in the head and falling over dramatically, right? And I was like, I don't really see that happening, but I was open, and so I went for prayer, and I just remember praying, and the priest came in front of me, and I just said, Lord, just do your will. And it was just like a lightning bolt went from the top of my head all the way down through my toes, and I went. Yeah. And it was just amazingly bright white light, and I never felt peace like that before. And I just thought, this has got to be what heaven feels like just complete peace. And it was after that experience that I knew without a doubt that there is a God and that he loved me.
Just reflecting on as you're sharing that, because we talk about the context of Alpha, and obviously you shared that, you came to faith outside of Alpha, but yet what's consistent in both those is God shows up through the lives of other people.
Right.
And it's funny to just even reflect on your story because I picked up with Mike after that, because when I came to Alpha, Mike was my table leader. And so for me, in my mind, I'm my first image of Mike is as a follower of Jesus, and then you hear the backstory, as opposed to obviously you guys had the history with him and saw that conversion. But it's funny how you formulate your ideas around people. It's like, oh, Mike was like that. Huh, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of interesting to think. Yeah,
Mike has a past.
But just how in both situations, in your case, it was the change in your parents, and then it was this pilgrimage, and so it's kind of that combined structural religious event, for lack of a better term. Right. I don't know. Sometimes probably structure and religion going together doesn't sound encouraging to people.
Right.
But ultimately, it was God working through people.
Right. Well, it was allowing for that space for the Holy Spirit to come.
Yeah.
Right. So going to that prayer, that healing service, and same with Alpha. It was the night on healing where Mike went up for prayer and had a powerful experience of the Holy Spirit. So, yeah.
Tanya, in that too, one of the things I want to pick up on is that and it was so cool. I've never heard that story. I mean, I've heard parts of it, but have you telling that was just so beautiful for me. But one of the things I didn't know was that you witnessed your parents, their transformation and their love for each other. You saw a tangible difference in your parents, and that's what opened the door for you. And at Saint Benedict, one of the things that we're so keen on is, do we love kids and evangelize kids and teenagers? Of course. But our primary focus is evangelizing adults. And we've seen so many kids come to faith because their parents came to faith. Now, I'm not saying it's the only way. Of course we want to, and I know other churches might take a different approach, and that's okay. But that's so cool, because that was your story too. And there's so many other stories. I think of the McDonald's, like Shannon and David McDonald and Johnny B or apostles and their kids, right? But they saw their parents come alive, opened up for the kids. Hey, there must be something to this. And so anyway, I just think that's so cool.
And I think even more powerful than, maybe not more powerful, but really significant is the father in the situation. I was a very devout Catholic when my kids were born. Mike was compliant. Right. Our kids were baptized, had their sacraments, and I really wanted my kids to know the faith, and they were faithful, and they were on that journey. But both of them have said it wasn't until they saw their dad have this conversion that their faith felt real, that their faith came alive, and that it was no longer my influence alone. It was like, this is real. This is real. This isn't just something that we don't just go to church. We don't just, say our prayers. This is a real relationship.
I hope there's men listening right now, because I know there's men. My dad was like that too. He was just like Mike, except he never came to that place where Mike came to. And I think to myself, I hope there's men listening all over the world right now. And I want to say something to you. It's time to man up. Come to Christ. Come home. Your family is counting on you. Your behavior, your attitude, your disposition, your openness, your leadership matters. Come home. Your family needs you.
So with that in mind, I mean, there's all these different ways that we've had conversion, that we've come to things. I mean, I've shared my story on the podcast before about World Youth Day and what it did to me and sort of opened me up. But thinking directly about Alpha and about what you do with engagement, how is it that, and why is it that it's important for those individuals to be able to share their story? I mean, we just talked about the ideas. When you see other people, when you see this happen to other people, you go, I have a question. How did that work, and how do I get that?
Right.
So what do you do in your role and with Alpha and with engagement to facilitate that sharing of that experience throughout the community?
Yeah, because that's really where people's lives get transformed. People's hearts don't get transformed by information, right? It's sharing those stories and those feelings and emotions through empathy that people really connect. And through the Alpha journey, we start encouraging people to share their experiences minutes after we're done the weekend away. and I'm gonna say this is probably all Ron's doing. I'm sure over the years, just creating space at the very end of the weekend away to ask people to come forward to share what their experience was. And we have had, oh my goodness, some amazing witnesses, very spontaneously, people just coming up, because in that moment it's still so raw and real, and they want to share it. The other thing is that we encourage people to write it down. Father Simon, he could not stress this enough, how when we have these experiences, we forget. We're human. We forget the details, right? And we forget sometimes how we felt in those moments. And we encourage everybody to, as soon as the weekend away is done, write it down, share it with your table group. And in those times where you start to sort of stray, or you think, I don't know, like, was it really that powerful? Was it really an experience? Did I really feel peace? Did I really? Yes, you did, because you in your own handwriting
right there.
wrote it down. Exactly. And so that begins sort of the way that we would encourage people to share their stories with one another. We actually have, in the weeks ahead, some tips and some things about how to, like, practically share, right? And it's so easy, and people so often, I feel like people overthink it. And it's like, it doesn't have to be weird. Please, actually, don't make it weird. Don't make it weird. But it can be something that you take and say, hey, listen, Ron, you and I are friends and we work together. I see that you're really stressed out lately. And you know what? I felt that too. But somebody invited me to this thing called Alpha. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. But I went on Alpha and this was my experience. And yeah, of course, all the stress is still there, but I don't feel like it's weighing me down anymore. And it could be just as simple as that. Right?
That
It's
is
amazing.
simple.
I mean, we as you know, we could talk about Alpha and these things all day, but for today, that's the time that we have. So I want to thank you first off for coming and sharing with us, because I think hearing this and hearing the idea of, like, don't make it weird, write it down so you can share it, and witness people's experiences and understand, like, how important your experience can be to another person's conversion or experience with Christ is, I think, so powerful. So I want to thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We'd like to thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to have you, and we're so excited for what's happening next week. So stay tuned for a sneak peek. God bless.
Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard today, download the Divine Renovation app from the Apple App Store or Google Play to stay connected with all things Divine Renovation.
Next week on the podcast.
We also need to work very much on making sure that people love the experience they're having, because then they want to share it. It's in our user manual. Evangelism's in the user manual. It's the Great Commission. Go and make. At Saint Benedict, you really broken that down and said, okay, well, how do we do that?